There is a supernatural world that surrounds us. Sometimes it manifests to people like you and me. Your stories about this and so much more right here on another episode of Supernatural Confrontations. I am your host, L.A. Marzulli. Josh Turner joins us this evening. We'll be talking about Dogman, Bigfoot, werewolves. It's just the stuff of, legend of Bela Lugosi and Lon Chaney and all that, or is there something more to it? I think most of you know where I fall, and I know where Josh falls. And I think you'll find this interesting because, folks, it's happening. And I think we're rapidly closing in on something which the last of the last days. We'll see what happens. Anyway, we'll get into that. But first, a word from our trusted sponsor. Folks, this is the Noble Gold Investments Market Update. Gold is up 46% in a year, doubling NASDAQ and S&P 500 gains. But this isn't just another rally. Global reserves are shifting as investors rush to secure physical gold, creating a massive supply gap. Gold is vanishing from the market, but you still have a chance. Visit noblegoldinvestments.com today and turn their panic into profit. Make a qualified investment, and Noble Gold will add a free tenth of an ounce gold coin to your order. Folks, Peggy and I did this 2 years ago. Best thing we ever did. I predict it's going to go way over 3,000. That's conjecture on my part. There's always a risk with any type of transaction like this, but I'm glad we did it, and I have a lot of confidence in Noble Gold. Once again, noblegoldinvestments.com, noblegoldinvestments.com. Josh Turner, thanks so much for joining us. You're the author of two books, one on Sasquatch, Bigfoot, or as they call it in the native tribe up in Alaska, Kushtaka. I love that. That's really my favorite, Kushtaka. I mean, it's just, wow. I got that from Flo, who appeared on my show a little while ago. But, you've been deep into this. I'm sure you know your deceased colleague, Scott Carpenter, who passed away over a year ago now, I guess maybe two, and had some amazing pictures of Squatch. In your opinion, what are we looking at here? What is this?
Well, okay, so my take on the Bigfoot, I have not had a close encounter with Bigfoot. I did see something one time, and it was kind of from the side. And I own a security company, and I own a construction company, but we had a build going, and I was doing the security, and there was this area where we had gotten reports of stuff. But at that time, I had not really gone deep into it or researched it a whole lot in that area. And so we kind of learned firsthand that there was something there because some of the builds of the houses, when you would go in to check them, like the doors, like in particular, we went into one house and the doors were all like open, so we closed them. Then you go back later on, they're reopened. You
Huh,
know,
huh.
yeah, weird stuff like that was happening. And then we had guards telling us, including I have three nephews, and two of them were working that site off and on, and they reported weird things happening. So it wasn't just the regular guards; it was people that I knew very well and trusted. So I ended up having to work that site because we had 6 accounts going with this large company, and I worked it with my wife. Sometimes she would go, or usually she would, not always, and I would have to work these long hours. And this was back in 2017, and we were turning the corner. I remember we were doing like our round, we kind of did this little U-turn, this cul-de-sac, and there was this pasture, right? I mean, here around Austin, they're building right up to people's farms and ranches,
Okay.
especially at that time. Now they're just buying them and then they build because it's blowing up everywhere. So when we did this turn, she's like, "What is that? What is that?" And I saw all the cattle, and I grew up first 15 years of my life around cattle. I grew up out in the country until my mother and father separated, and then I ended up living in the barrio. Well, my mother's Mexican, right? And so that actually just, it was like a culture shock. But so I was used to cows, and I know how they act, I know how they respond. Most of my family on both sides had cattle, and I was like, they were all bunched up into one little corner, which was really weird, and they were mooing really loud, which is why we had gone over there. And she's like, "What is that?" And I look, and for a split second, what I saw, just it looked like I don't know, it was like the side of something like a brownish, reddish color, kinda mixed with like a chocolate color, and it it was like, and like it went behind a tree that was too small to really conceal it, but it was, and then it was gone, but it was really wide. And I know it wasn't a cow because we had these really powerful flashlights. And as soon as we turned, I put the flashlight, and there was all the cows were in one corner, and I saw this. And so I looked at my wife, Nellie, and I said, what did you see? Because I know what I just saw, and it just looked bizarre. It wasn't a cow. And she was like, I don't know. I think I just saw a Sasquatch or Bigfoot.
Well,
And so I was like, what did it look like? And now for me, it's not a dog man because it had like this flat ape-like face, and it was kind of hunched down. She said it stood up. It was about 8, 9 feet tall, and it just went behind that tree, but it had hunched back over to kind of hide because there was some mesquite right there too. And so when it went behind the tree, I I don't count it as a sighting because I don't know what I saw. Like but it was definitely not a cow. It wasn't a bull. It wasn't anything like that. And so I was like, I think that might have been because it went behind that tree. So we held the light on it, never came out. So I had Nellie go around. Like I stood there and she drove around the other side. And but she was really tentative, she was apprehensive about leaving me there. And I said, look, I'm right here in this one of the houses. I said, I'm just gonna look across the street. And she went around and she's like, it's gone, there's nothing there. And so it led me to believe like that it probably was a Bigfoot. And it confirms for me that they're not completely a flesh and blood thing, because that the way it disappeared. And I have colleagues they're very much in the flesh and blood camp, but they've had similar sightings, and they don't know what to say. And one of my colleagues in particular, he says, well, it's something we can't comprehend. And I'm like, well, we definitely can't comprehend it, but I think I know a little bit about what the nature of these things are. And I know you and I have talked at length, and we're kind of in agreement on kind of what they are. And it was even before that I felt that way, but I had not had anything more than like what may or may not have been some encounters with these things. Now, when I was a child, I think I had another one when I was about 11, and I used to collect baseball cards, and we lived way out in the country, out in Rockdale, Texas. And I rode my bike into town, and my dad was really upset with me because I got on the highway. I rode my bike just because I was so determined to trade, for Ken Griffey Jr. card or whatever it was at that time that was popular, And so I can't remember what it was, but there's this one kid in town. He had this card, and he says, "Hey, if you come over here, we're going to be trading whatever." So I rode my bike, and I rode back out at night. And my dad worked shift work at that time, and I was living with him because temporarily my parents had separated. And he would work like 7 to 3, or sometimes 3 to 11, sometimes 11 to 7. Well, that day he was on the swing shift, and so I was able to get away with it. And so I told him, yeah, I'll be back by 7 o'clock. Yeah, ridiculous. No, I wasn't. I was back like 9 or 10, and I was coming back, and it was pitch dark on this long, gravel road about a mile and a half with no habitation until you get to a house. And then our neighbor, there was like a house that was like an eighth of a mile from us. And then there was a couple more down the road. But you're walking down this gravel road, and I heard this sort of grunting sound.
mm,
And then same thing. The cattle were all bunched up against this barbed wire fence. And I was like, why are they? It looked like they were stuck. Like, why are these cows all, stuck like that? And I saw this big kind of shadow move bipedally. At least it's what it looked like to me. And immediately as a kid at that age, I was like, I knew, like I'd heard the stories of Bigfoot. I had read a little bit of stuff. I wasn't like big into monsters or anything like that, but I knew enough to know this could be Bigfoot because one of our neighbors down the road had claimed to have seen one taking away one of its calves.
wow.
And that was about 2 months before that. And so my dad kind of laughed it off, but he also worked on a farm up in Washington where a guy had, told him that he had actually shot one of these things. And so my dad was like not a full-on believer, but he was not a denier because we lived in this house when we were young that definitely was haunted. I mean, there's 100%, there was no way around it. Both sides of my family had come over and experienced weird stuff, and they were just like, your house is haunted. Like, there was no denying it. So I come home one day, and my dad, who's just like grounded, former Baptist, but became non-denominational and was very like it's in the Bible or it's not. You know what I mean? There's no talking about these things, whatever. Don't talk about it. And in the Hispanic culture, my mother's culture, you don't talk about you talk it up if you talk about it. You're not supposed to talk about it. Well, Jesus says we die for lack of knowledge. So even as a child, I knew the Bible very well, and I went to this Christian Science school, and I was like, this isn't correct. We need to acknowledge these things and rebuke them in the name of Christ, not hide from them. And even as a child, I knew that, and I was being taught that. And so my parents just packed everything up and we just left. And we were renting that place. And I remember we ended up like breaking the lease, and my dad had to like kind of put us on a budget because he had to pay these people, because we had bailed. And he's like, look, I got to pay a fee or something. And I just remember thinking, why did we do that if my dad doesn't believe in any of this? So something had happened to him while he was asleep. And when we came home years later, he told me that he heard what sounded like a loud explosion, like a boom. And it woke him up, and he heard like a screaming. And I was of the opinion that whatever was there, it didn't like women. It was like a shadow type entity. And me and 5 of my cousins all saw it the night before Thanksgiving when I was a child walking down the hallway. And we all saw it, and it looked like a large man dragging a bag behind him. Yeah, and so there were times when I would be sitting there playing with my action figures or whatever, Transformers, and I would see a shadow come up behind me, and I wouldn't turn around and look. I would just sit there going like, okay, hopefully it goes away. And this was way out in the middle of the country. And then we had this pond next to us. When we first moved in, my dad's like, well, isn't this pond beautiful? It's so beautiful. Then we found like 12 cats that were in that pond that had been put there. And so one of our pastors he was like he would kind of substitute for the pastor, whatever.
All right.
Because our pastor was traveling, doing like missionary work. And so this guy, when I talked to him, his name was Brother Steve, and he's like, there is something not right about that many cats being found, and that somebody's doing that. So
Yeah.
it could be something, evil, like satanic, And so there was definitely something there. Something was going on there. And then I remember the landlord, we ran into him at this place called McVoy's, was like a little where my parents got our meat. And so it was like a meat market. And I remember his nephew was a little older than me. He played baseball together. And he was like, y'all used to live in that old house out there. I said, yeah. And he goes, man, that thing is haunted. He goes, my uncle cannot keep anybody out there. He's like, and he goes, and this is what he told me. He said, you guys are lucky that you never saw the creature out there. There's a Bigfoot type creature that runs around out there. And I was like, really? So, I had been exposed to, that was before, I had so that night that I was walking home, I just walked my bike and I started praying. And I said the Lord's Prayer and I prayed really hard. And I was just like, I'm a sinner. I mean, like I've done things and, I'm not, everybody thinks you're supposed to be perfect. You're not, but there are times when it doesn't matter what you believe. You're going to believe in God at some point. And that point, I was like walking home, carrying my backpack, and I was on my bike and in the gravel. I couldn't ride my bike on the gravel. And so, because there was these big old rocks and it would make you fall. And so I had to walk it. And there was something in that pasture. And I prayed and I was like, God, help me. And he did. And I really feel that. And so I made it home. I told my sister and my dad, and they kind of laughed at me. Later I told my mother, and my mother was like, don't talk about that stuff. If you talk about it, it's going to come to you. And my mother had quite a few experiences. And so she sat me down and she told me, she's like, Mijo, you have the ojo do toro. It's like the gift of the eye. And she goes, you can see things that others can't. She goes, but you can't really go around talking about it. Now you got to realize, like, back in the day, there were still places that they would put you if you said too many weird things.
I know. Right.
Yeah. They were just like, what's wrong with this kid? Why is he going around saying that he's seeing ghosts and whatnot? This is not correct, So I kind of hardened my heart toward those things. And I asked God, I was like, I don't want to see any of this. I don't want to deal with this. So I kind of went blind to it, I guess, for a while because, I stayed in some places where I knew there was stuff, but I wouldn't see it. Thank goodness. But when I was 15 years old, and this gets into the whatever you want to call it, dogman, werewolf, whatever. That's when it turned into a reality again. Like it came back. Like, for a few years, it was kind of like it was laying dormant. I knew things were there, but I would ignore it. And so
let me stop you right there. Are you still in the same house, or have you moved?
No. I was living in town in Taylor, Texas. Yeah, my mom and dad had separated, and then they divorced, and it was a really bad divorce, and they were going through a lot of stuff. And so the house that my mom was living in at that time was reputed to be haunted. But like I said, I kind of had walled it off, so I didn't have a lot of stuff happen to me there. Now I did have a couple weird, like kind of prophetic dreams while I was living there. But I was always like I was in trouble a lot, and I got locked up 4 times as a youth, and then got put in treatment centers because they don't want you to drink or smoke, marijuana and all this stuff. And I was running around raising hell because, you come from a broken home and your parents hate each other. I was used as a pawn between them with their divorce, and so I didn't feel comfortable. I just wasn't. So I started running around with my friends, and one of them was a hellraiser. His name was Daniel. We were best friends. He's now a preacher in my hometown. Yeah. He's well known, and he does things. I just love the way the Lord comes and takes to broken people and goes, "Okay, you're going to do this," and here we are, right? Yeah.
Wow.
He was like me. He went through all the drug abuse and everything else that you
Right.
could possibly imagine. We were raising hell until our 20s, and then something changed for him.
Right.
And he stopped, and I think he was more of a hellraiser than me. And then later, I see him in town one day at a restaurant, and he's like, comes up to me and he's like, "Brother, I want you to come to church with me." And I'm just like, at that time in my life, I was thug life. I was running a club downtown on 6th Street here in Austin, and I was into a lot of stuff. And I was like, "Nah, man, I'm good, bro." And he's just like, "No." He goes, and then he pulls me aside from my brother and my friends, and I went and I kind of sat with him, and he was just kind of sitting at the edge of the bench, like he was, gonna bolt any minute. And then that conversation turned into like an hour-long conversation. And I remember him telling me, he says, "You remember that thing we saw back in 1990 in October? It was Halloween." And I said, "Yeah, I remember. How could I forget? We've talked about it." He says, "There's a reason for that." And he didn't say, and I think this is the case. We didn't see it like God put it there. I think it was just there, but God allowed us to see it. So we would see, hey, this stuff that we made fun of was real. My tia Hova, my abuelita, which would be my grandmother, my mom's side, she died when I was very young. And so she passed the torch on to my tia Hova, who became like my surrogate grandmother. And of all her nieces and nephews, and she had a bunch of us, almost 30 of us, she always told me I was her favorite.
Wow.
And I would spend time with her in the summer, and she had my abuela, which was my great grandmother, was full-blooded Comanche. And she spoke Spanish, but not clean Spanish like Jovita did. Jovita was very bilingual, and just so I could speak Spanish at that time, but not on that level, not. And so she spoke another language, was Nurmana, which is the Comanche language, and she would talk in that language sometimes. And I didn't understand it. And one day she asked me a question at breakfast, and I looked at my great aunt, and she says, "Mijo, she asks you if you see the dead." And I'm like 9 years old, and I'm like, "What?" Like, "What are you talking about?" Like, it scared the crap out of me. And then I would wake up when I was there at their house in the summer. I would go there for spring break. I loved being there. It was a beautiful house in Temple, Texas. And I remember waking up, and she would be sitting there rocking back and forth in the rocking chair, and it would scare the crap out of me because she'd be so quiet, and I would just see her watching me, and she'd be praying, and she'd have the rosary, and she would be praying, the 12 truths and all this stuff, which I didn't know anything about any of that at that time. And I would go to the Catholic church with them because they were Catholic, right? So by extension, I ended up doing catechism, and I told my mother, who had converted to Baptist, and I'm like, "Why am I going to catechism?" And she says, "Because they expect you to. So you're just going to go and pretend like you like it." And I was like, "I don't." And she's like, "Well, your opinion doesn't matter. You're 9 years old, so shut up." And so my dad told me too. He's like, my dad, big time, did not like the Catholic Church. He was very much not. He wasn't Pentecost. He was evangelist, and he was just like, "Look, you just go because that's what." And so his stepmother, which was my only grandmother I ever really knew, he said, she's Catholic too at St. Mary, so you're going to go. And so sometimes I would have to go to church with her at St. Mary. Sometimes I would go to Lady of Guadalupe with my great aunt. And they would always say the same thing. My grandmother on my dad's side, that she had seen this creature that was like this upright wolf-like thing when she was in Alexandria, Louisiana with my grandfather. And then on the road to Candelaria years later, from Marfa to Candelaria, which is in Mexico, my grandfather had quite the colorful life. He was stealing cattle and uh, goats and sheep and other things. He was doing all kinds of stuff with these people down there. He was always an outlaw, but he attested to this. He was a very wild man, but he said, look, there are things out there that you can't possibly know, but they're real. And he claimed to have seen these little small, what looked like coyotes that could stand on their hind legs and move around like men.
Well,
And I thought it was just more boogeyman stories to make you behave. But my grandpa really wasn't interested in making me behave. So I kind of thought that was weird. He taught me how to cuss and shoot a 38 when I was like 7 or 8 years old, you know? So I was like, well, he might be telling the truth. But for my grandmother, I never knew her to be untruthful. So when she told me that she had seen this wolf-like creature, and the reason it came up is because I asked her about what my tia Hova would tell me. She said, mijo, don't go out at night because the hombre lobo will get you. And I'm like, what is this? Like, in Mexican culture, it's like everybody's Juelita, your grandmother. You know, they have a fantasmo that is in the hallway, and there's a cucuy in the grandma's closet, and there's a lechuza in the trees, and chupacabras running around, and you know, don't go to the water because La Llorona's there. You know, and I just thought this is all this mentiras. I don't believe none of this. This is stories to scare kids, and well, just behave and you won't get drug out the window, you know, by the manos peludos, the hairy hand, you know, the devil's hands. They'll pull you out the window. So they scare the crap out of you with this stuff. And so I thought this is just more of her nonsense. So I went to my other grandmother and I said, Grandma, I said, you know, Tia Hova told me the hombre lobo is going to get me if I go. She goes, and my grandmother knew what that was. She goes, you mean the wolf man? I said, yeah. And she goes, okay. And she goes, come sit down. And I was a little kid, you know, and she says, okay. And she says, back in the 70s. And then she proceeded to tell me, I would have been like 2 years old when this happened. I think it was in 1977. She said, me and your grandfather saw this thing. And when she described it to me, it sent chills down my back. But then years later, you know, I'm running all over the town. I'm doing all this. I don't see nothing, you know. I heard all these stories and legends, and I really thought that's all it was. But on October 31st, 1990, we were coming back from egg and cop cars because there's like a tradition in my hometown. So we were hanging out with these other near do wells, and we were throwing eggs at the cop cars. My mother gave me which I guess you know would be at that time a very lenient curfew because she knew I was going to come home late anyway. She said. And she was very tired of my crap. I was a hellraiser. She says, "Look, pendejo, be home by 11 p.m. Okay." And then she made this really weird statement. She says, you know, kids who run around doing whatever they want to do, they see the devil. You know, I was like, what? And so I said, okay. So I left. And my friend was just like, he was like, hey, your mom is mean. And I'm thinking, my mom is not really. At the time, I thought, yeah, she's mean, but it was really for my own good. Because I think she knew deep down too, there was something not right in that area. There was something there. And so, you know, people would see these things. And so I go out and I did what I did. So I get back to my friend Daniel Robles's house and his mother, Martha, who was like my spiritual mother. She says, mijo, your mom is very angry. She's like, you know, it's 11:10. And she said, absolutely not past 11. It's a school night. She said, so you need to go, you know, whatever. And I can't remember, you know, what night of the week it was. I just remember her saying, hey, you know, you shouldn't be out, you know, whatever, past 11. It doesn't matter what day, whatever. And so she says, you need to go home. And she's like, but she's real bad diabetic. Right. And so she was having a blood sugar episode and she couldn't take me. And I remember her saying, like, she's like, I would take you, but I can't drive right now. And but my friend's dad was there too, and he called my mother and says, "Hey, I'm gonna go ahead and just bring him because Martha couldn't drive." but he had problems. He couldn't see at night, right? He couldn't see good at night. And so he never drove at night, hardly ever. And he had eye problems. And the whole time I've ever known him, and he's still alive, he always wears sunglasses during the day because he's had eye problems. And so my mother calls back up and tells, no, nobody take him. Let him walk home. She was adamant about that. And so I got all mad. And so Sal, my friend's dad, offered to like drive me part way. I didn't want them to have to do all that and it's a burden for them. I said, don't worry about it. I'll walk home. And so my friend Daniel says, you know what? I'll walk you to Henderson's house. And we call him Henderson because his name was Daniel too, because him and his brother, they would work on bikes. They would repair. So they always had a bunch of bikes outside the house. So you could grab one. We're like all best friends. We grew up together, played ball together. So I was just going to ride the bike the rest of the way. So he says, I'll walk you over there a couple blocks down to Henderson's and you could ride a bike, just grab one and ride it. He leaves them out there, And so I said, okay. So we go to the Circle K and I get one of those really big drinks like the Dr. Peppers. It's like this, full of soda, and real healthy. And just like the rest of our diets, And so I'm walking and I'm over there like looking down. I remember looking at the ground and just complaining about how horrible my mother was, which in reality, I was the one that was doing what I was supposed to be doing. And all of a sudden my friend puts his hand up and I just kind of stop and I look and I'm like, what? I don't see it at first. And he's like, and he points and he says, look over there. What is that? And I look and I'm like, I don't know what that is. And it was black sitting in a ditch. And it had this really large head. And I was staring at it and I was like, I think that's Misty. It was our friend had a German Shepherd, but it was small. She was actually small for a German Shepherd. She was the runt. And his family had some dogs. And I said, is that her? And I started to call and there was no response. This dog would come running to us. She was a sweet dog. And he goes, that's not John's dog. I don't know what that is. So, us being kind of like, even though we're in town, we're kind of on the edge of town and we're pretty country people. We pick up a rock, to try to throw it to scare it or whatever, because dogs will run away. And when we did this thing I guess it just kind of saw us bending down, standing up and kind of moving. We caught its attention and it turned and looked at us. And I'll never forget, it was facing like, and the left side of it, we could see it. And it turned and it looked at us and because it looked like he was digging or something. And what should have been paws came up and they looked like hands. Then we saw like these were arms and this was like the upper body didn't look right. And then real quick, it stood up and was like, doop, 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 and ran across the road on two legs. And we were both staring at it in shock. And the next thing you know, I feel this burn on my neck, like something's burning my neck. And I just was I remember looking down, in the Japanese, they call it satori, like where time just kind of slows down. It's almost like it stops. And I remember seeing the ice on the ground and the cup, and there was like this Dr. Pepper everywhere. And I was just stunned. And I look up and I'm like, oh, my neck. And my friend is like almost back to his house. Because there was one house on the corner there where these drug dealers used to live. This is the barrio. It was a bad area. And then his house. Now that house on the corner is no longer there. It's gone. It's been leveled. But at that time, I remember there was a big fence around it. And it was like an 8-foot fence. The reason that is because the city, they had these pit bulls. And so the city told them, get rid of those dogs or put up this big old fence. So they did it because they were drug dealers. They could afford to do it, so they did it. And eventually they got raided and shut down, but not until they sold a bunch of crack to everybody, But that's another story. It was a horrible place. But anyway, the house was now abandoned and there was the fence that was there and it had been there for a while, and the fence was kind of dilapidated on one side, but it was holding on the other. And I just remember like feeling that neck burn and then looking at my shirt was kind of ripped. And I was like, what the heck just happened? And so I started walking just kind of wobbly, because it felt like I couldn't walk. My legs, even now talking about it, my legs feel tense. And I just see this thing walking, coming between the two houses. I'll never forget. And I'm like, oh my God, what is this? What is this thing I'm looking at? Everything I had been told, all the trips that we had taken from Central Texas to South Texas to San Juan to these to the mission there to light these candles. I hated going down there. And halfway down there, I'd be scared to death because my Tia Hova would tell me all these scary stories, you know. Now that whole, he grabbed this man and drug him out of the cotton field, and she had a story about the black dog, which, you know, and she would just tell me these terrifying stories. By the time I got there, I was lighting candles and I was on my knees praying because I was terrified, you know. And I was just like, God, protect me from all these creatures. And eventually you get older, you're like, yeah, I have my Walkman on. Back then we had Walkmans with cassette tapes, you know.
I remember, sure.
Yeah. And I'd put it in and I'd just be like, yeah, whatever, dude. Yeah, okay, yeah, scary stories, whatever. I hated this trip, you know. And then I hated having to go to the revival every year in Corpus. Now I would love to go there. It's like good memories, you know. But my mom was like, you always hate going. She goes, but then when we get there and we go to the revival, you always love it. You get to talk to all the other teenagers. And she's like, and then you're on fire for God for about a week. And then you go back to your bull crap and then you get locked up. Like, you know, this is a pattern, you know. And it was a pattern. And so we end up like all those stories that she told me, I'm like, this in LA, it was like this profound moment of like, this is real.
Mhm.
These were not just stories. I don't know how many of these people that saw this thing, you know, maybe hyped it up to more than what it was, but what I saw was pretty darn, it was pretty scary. And it just walked. Once it got around the house, it was just walking, just looking right at me, and it came right up to the edge of that fence, and I was like, you know, at one point, I think I was probably like maybe 10, 12 feet away from it,
Wow, it's close.
which isn't very far.
Well, that's
And it was a smoky gray color. It was black. And I'm staring at this thing, and I don't remember like a tail, like exactly. I think it had one, but I just saw the leg. And I saw it like put its like a hand up on the fence. And it did it very deliberately, you know, like it wanted to exaggerate its movements. And I was terrified. I thought I was going to fall over dead. I was 15 years old. And I'm looking at this thing and I'm walking still slowly, kind of giving it a wide berth so I could go around and get in the house, my friend's house. And at that point, I was looking at it and I remember specifically, and I've said this before in many interviews, this thing had a foot when it went up, like, and it latched onto the bottom rung of that fence, or this, you know, one of the bottom rungs. It looked like like a raptor claw. Is what it looked like. Its feet had these big claws on it, like, and they were very pronounced. And I've heard this before in other people's encounters. It didn't look right. It didn't, like, even like a wolf's paw would not look like that, you know. But the head was strictly like werewolf. Like it looked like a werewolf, like you would see from you know, Underworld, or like what a better example would be like The Howling or Silver Bullet, one of these werewolf movies, you know. And I'm looking at this thing and I'm like, I still can't believe I'm looking at this thing, and it's black, and it's turned and it's facing me. And then my friend's dad, Sal, comes out, and he was holding a shotgun, and he was just like, you know, he goes, hey, Josh, he's like, come on, come inside. You know, he said it in Spanish, andale, ven para acá, you know, whatever. And so I just started running, and I just got the courage to run from that point to the house. And this thing began to be a little more frantic, and I heard the fence moving, and he stayed out there with that thing for, you know, a couple minutes, and then came back inside. And I remember him saying, like, it's around the other side of the house. And my friend's siblings were kind of looking. My friend had run back to his back bedroom to grab something, like I think he had a machete or something. And I was just sitting on the couch like this, stunned, watching them look out the kitchen, or the dining room slash kitchen, which became the kitchen, whatever. Or kitchen, which became the dining room. They remodeled the house since then. But there was this big tall window, and everybody was freaking out because the thing walked by the window.
whoa.
And so, you know, like three of the four siblings and his mother saw it. So years later, when my brother had come back out of the army, and he was teasing me about it. He said, oh, you saw the Michigan Dogman, because he was from Michigan. His mother was from Michigan. And I said, what is the Dogman? I didn't know what that was. He said, well, that's what they call this thing. And I said, well, you know, in my hometown where I grew up, and he wasn't there the whole time because he was living with his mother. Michigan's my half brother. I said, here in Taylor, you know, where we were from, the white people called it a werewolf. The black people called it the haint, and the Hispanic people called it the calejo, or the hombre lobo. And the hombre, it could be hombre or hombre. It could be like either the hungry wolf or it can be like the wolf man, either one. That's what it was.
Mhm.
And supposedly it made people go missing, and it was responsible for taking people's livestock and doing all this stuff. We did a show on Paranormal Roundtable. It was called Texas Wolfman, I think it was. And there's a police officer who was retired from there who claimed that there were these people that were being found unalived, you know, and these railroad cars near where the trains intersected, because that's where the cotton gin was. Now there's cotton gins all over that area because there used to be a big cotton trade there. And so there were people that were being unalived, but the county and the commissioner and everybody at that time, they were like, look, we don't want this to get out and it becomes our problem. These people were dead on arrival. These were rail riders, hobos that had come from Milam or Travis or some other county, and that's how they ended up here. They didn't die here. And the police were told that's what they're supposed to say. Like, it didn't happen here. And he got inebriated, and I was doing security, or my company was, for the barbecue cook-off. And I think it was in 2009 or something like that, 2010, one of those years. And I had been hired to do, I think the JCs were the ones that hired us. I can't remember. It's been so long. So like there was always somebody that was in charge of it, you know. And I remember him telling us, me and two of my guards and my friend Scorpion, we call him Scorpion. He helps with the show. To this day, he's still one of my best friends. Been working for me for years, since 1999. We started working with me at the club, and now he does security for me. But he was there, and he can attest to this. This police officer, retired, he says, I was the one who answered the call of a prowler around the house that night, and then you guys told us this wild story. He goes, I always believed you. He had told me that he believed me. He says, but I'm going to tell you something else. And he began to talk, and he told us about these people who were unalive. He said that the deal was, though, that they were down by the line. Now, the line was the segregation line. There were black and Hispanic people, and that's all that lived on the south side of Taylor past the line. So nobody took it serious. They're like, okay, a bunch of, first, second generation people from Mexico or their descendants, basically, or black people. And back in those days, nobody cared. Nobody cared what they had to say. And it was very racial. Even when I grew up, I was called a half-breed for a large part of my life. Well, and I thought nothing of it. I was just like, I'm a half-breed. Until one of my black friends from Austin, we went to go eat at Taylor Cafe, and it was very segregated. And he's sitting there looking around, and he's like, y'all just segregate yourselves over here. And I was like, kind of looked around, and I was like, well, this is just how it is. And he goes, and that guy serving you, he called you a breed. And I was like, yeah, that's what I am. And he goes, no, you're not. He goes, this is crazy, man. What are y'all living in a time capsule? That said, I'm down Texas, and it was the old South, and I said, I don't know. This is what it was. I never thought of it as racial. I just said, well, I guess this is how it is. But it wasn't like people were just mean to each other out in public. It was just kind of like, you stuck to your own. So I was an anomaly. I wasn't really, there wasn't a lot of interracial, even with Hispanic and white people. There weren't very many of us. There was only one other family that I could think of that had people like me. And I was like, well, come to think of it, there really wasn't many, in that Gen X. And I was like, I just always thought I was just, I was a breed, it's what they would call me. Even the coaches sometimes would refer to you like, boy, bring your half-breed butt over here. They'd say stuff. And this was a black coach that used to say that to me, but it was almost like I just got used to it. I was just like, this is how it is. Yeah. And so you kind of grow up that.
What year is this? This is like, it's hard to even believe that this is what you're saying belongs to the 1930s.
Yeah.
40s, not, 1990 or something. I mean,
no. And at the time when I went back with my friend, it was like 1992 or something, something like that.
Right.
It was still very much that way. But like I said, we just kind of all grew up that way, and we got along. Like, I had black and Hispanic friends. It wasn't like people that I know of were telling you, don't hang out with these people or anything like that. And Taylor Cafe and my nephew has talked about it on our show. It's like, even when he was growing up, and this is in the 2000s, he remembers Taylor Cafe just being very segregated. It was just like the blacks sat with each other, the Mexicans sat with each other, the whites sat with each other. But I think that's just how everybody kind of grew up. So they just kind of, and it was kind of that way at Randy's Ice House. That's one of the local watering holes there. And then I saw it start to sort of change eventually after the 2000s. Now it's more integrated and they've joined the rest of civilization. But it is hard to fathom that. And I tell people that I was born in 1975. I'm 49 years old as of this recording, but I'm sitting there going like, yeah, this is just kind of how I grew up. And I didn't really see a problem. I was just like, this is just what it is. I remember this officer.
Let me ask you something here. Okay, so you've got phenomena going on. When I was down in New Mexico, on one of the reservations there, with the Hopi and the Navajo, and mostly Navajo, basically the Dene people, and I talked to a Navajo elder. I lost the tape; it burned in the fire, or the SD card. But he was studying to be a skinwalker. He was studying to be a medicine man. And he talked about, in order to get the power, you had to kill a family member.
Love the one. Mm-hmm.
Right. That's what the rule was. And I've some people will take umbrage with that, but Chief Joseph said the same thing. Someone you love, family member, something like that. So skinwalkers, and we're not even supposed to say the word, are real. There's no doubt about it. Is that what you saw, in your opinion?
See, now I'm going to get to that. See, now here's the thing. After having seen that, I started keeping journals, and I had like 32 to 30. I don't know how many, 36. They were not complete altogether. I had a bunch of them. Every time I'd run into somebody, I would ask them questions, like especially when you work in security or at a nightclub or a place like that where people see a lot of weird stuff. And I had all these journals. Unfortunately, I had an angry ex who began throwing my journals into the fireplace because she was mad about something. And her friend, who had a conscience, she calls me. She goes, "Look, you need to get over here." I'm not gonna say her name on the air, but she's like, she's angry. And she's lit a fire in your fireplace and she's throwing stuff in there. I come home and on the way there, I was like, please don't let it be my journals. And it was.
Oh man.
Because I was always writing in my journals, even though I was a fighter and for years and I broke all my fingers. I eventually had my brother type most of them up into, and then we made these kind of like, he spent hours doing this. I paid him to do this and he turned them into like these like stapled journals, whatever. And so we had, some of them were backed up, but most of them weren't. And I lost a lot of that. Happened to me recently too, with all the emails I get from people sending me their stories and encounters. The email actually filled up. And so they were like, buy some storage or, whatever. So I ended up losing a bunch of emails and then it filled up again. So we get a ton of people sending me, because I like to retell people's encounters, but a lot of people will just come on the show. And now we do this thing on Mondays where we just open the lines up and you get 10, 12 people in there trying to tell their stories. And it happens just without fail. They'll come on and try to tell it. People want to be heard. They want people to know.
I agree.
Not crazy.
I agree. I totally agree.
And so that's what we're doing now. And then we have every Friday we have a guest that'll come on and it's either an experiencer or a researcher or an author or somebody. But then on Wednesday and Sunday, I retell people's encounters. And so you can get them done, more of them done that way if you just do it yourself. And it's so there's so many people I've interviewed over the years, and like you yourself, you've been doing this a lot longer than me, but you interview all these people and it's like, there was this Bigfoot researcher from Washington. I remember he says, I don't believe in Dogman. And I told him, I said, I do. And the reason is because I have to, because I saw it.
Right.
So if that's what it is Dogman. I don't know what a Dogman exactly is now. But if you would have asked me 5 years ago if I saw a werewolf, I would have said probably not. But now, we did a show called The Werewolf Confessions, where there was a guy named Charles who had come to us and through a listener and it was weird. It was like the people that gave us his information had given us we had interviewed a guy about a creepy, scary Bigfoot story. And then, and I'll bring it all together and tell you what this has to do with each other. Then he tells me, he says, you need to talk to these people in Florida. They had this really crazy encounter with this something, and it was like a werewolf type creature in a convenience store. Right. It was a weird thing. Right. So they give me this story. And so I talked to this couple, and the lady, she's like, it was a man and a woman, a husband and wife, whatever. And she's like, you need to talk to Charles. And I'm like, who is Charles? And she's like, he actually was a werewolf.
Wow.
And I'm like, what? And so I first started talking to this guy. It wasn't like I thought it would be. When I first called this guy, he wasn't like, yeah, I'm going to tell you, I changed, and my wife, Morgan Fairchild, she comes down in helicopter, right? That's the ticket. No, he wasn't doing that. He was just like, what do you want to know? And he's just like, and I said, well, I was told by such and such, that you could shapeshift. He goes, not anymore. And he goes, I'm a born again Christian.
There you go. Amen.
So I said, but he said it was used to. And I said, what do you mean you used to? He goes, oh, I could tell you all about it, buddy. He goes, I want to talk to somebody with integrity. I want to know that you're going to tell my story correctly. I can't really show my face, but I want you to do it. Can you do this? Blah, 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 blah. And so I gave him some time to think about it. He watched some episodes and he says, okay, you know what? And he prayed and he did all this. And he says, look, I prayed, I fasted, I did all this. He's like, I'm going to tell you what it was that we did. And then he did. So that conversation, we just started talking, to being this guy. And he had said a few things the first time, but not like this. Like he went into details that I was not expecting. And at the time, LA, I was just sitting in my truck, kind of just kicking back, like not. And then he starts dumping all this heavy stuff on me. I'm like, whoa, wait, I'm not in my study. I don't have any. I have no way to record you or no way to, whatever, to get all this information. I need to go back to my house. So I just started driving back home. I was like at the grocery store and I was with my nephew, one of them. And he said, look, we got to get back to the house. This guy's telling me all kinds of stuff. So long story short, without, you can go back, guys, and listen to the episode. It was a live stream that we did from my house at that time. We weren't, because I couldn't go to the studio off and on. I was having problems, health problems. And so we ended up doing the story from my house. And I said, look, we got to do it. And it's like the time, I didn't even know if I was really ready, but like the spirit moves you to do it, you do it. You just got to do it. So I sat down and I just said, look, I'm going to do this. And I retold the gist of what he had given me. And it was like eye-opening. But he kept telling me about this guy, Joel. He's like, you really need to talk to Joel. And he named some other people, and he goes, these people, they all escaped from this cult. But it wasn't like they escaped. It was like when they accepted Christ and they put on and they all referred to this as the Christ shield. And they said, once they accepted Christ, and I've talked about this on PRT on the show, that's when everything changed. Like they could no longer be hurt by these people. These people could no longer cast spells on them. They couldn't attack them. They couldn't do anything to them, and their power, they couldn't do it. But they said that you have to really, really be in the faith, to be protected from this. Now, this guy, Joel, he practiced vampirism. So when he started telling me about this, we had gotten a lot of stories, and unbeknownst to me, and this is something that I'm writing a book and it's going to come out pretty soon, but I didn't know what vampirism really was. I didn't know how it worked. I just knew stories that we could maybe put into a category of something called a vampire. And you have this kind of preconceived notion of what it is because of Hollywood, right? So they have made werewolves and vampires into some sort of like comic book or fake world that's not real. Shape-shifting isn't real. These aren't real. This is all nonsense. And they do this, I think, so that you desensitize, and then you don't think of it like this could really happen. But if you're not protected, if you are not in Christ, to me, and like these people said, they say, you're a sitting duck. Anything and everything can happen to you. They can pour hot coals on your head all day because you're not protected. So these people that were involved in this, it was a cult. It was really a cult. And they went to a temple and they practiced vampirism. And so when I talked to Joel, who was this guy, Charles's aunt's boyfriend, he repeated like verbatim what this guy said, not even in the same state anymore. The numbers were completely different. And so I talked to this guy, and he says he's right what he's telling you. And he's like, we talked about whether we should speak to someone about this, but I think it's, you could do it justice. And so they started telling me. Then they introduced me to another girl that goes by Samantha, another one named Eve, and another guy named Carlos. And these people were all involved in this. And now they all go, they're church going, just, but the way they described it to me was like they have to be with no spiritual openings. They cannot allow their guard down even for a second, because anything at all creates a spiritual opening.
Yep. A doorway. Yep.
And then it's opened right back up because they're constantly being watched by these people who want them gone. And they don't have to come in with guns and knives and shoot you or kill you. They don't have to exsanguinate you or chew you up. They can have it look like an accident. They can make things happen to you because they practice black magic. And this magic is almost like a black science, which is really what that magic is. It's something that we don't really know. Because it's so far advanced from our human minds, and we're not supposed to really be messing with it or looking for it. That's why God tells us, over and over again, not to mess with this. That's why I tell people, don't play with Ouija boards. Don't mess with that, because you don't know what you're summoning.
Amen.
You don't know what you're going to get when you walk through that door. And then you're going to be like, God help me. And God's like, yeah, I told you, but you still did it anyway. And that's when people start to turn to Christ, because now you're got something going on. Well, I told these people, I said, look, when I was 15, I told them what happened to me. And they were like, I said, was that a werewolf? I asked all of the ones I interviewed.
Right.
And they were like, no idea. Maybe. But then again, one of them, Joel, he practiced vampirism, and he had all these occult, this knowledge of the occult that he had learned. They were drug dealers, LA. That's how they got involved in this. Because there are people that run the drug trade that actually use occult magic.
Oh, I know.
Yeah, and they
Santa Muerta, yeah,
at the Muerta, yeah, and they say God created me, Jesus forgives me, she protects me. The Santa Muerta is a female Grim Reaper,
right?
Yeah, and so they do this cult. It's like a cult to them, and so they told me they're very adamant about this. They said, when you go down this road, you're going to have to stay on the straight and narrow, because now it knows, which is like this evil consciousness that they all share, that you know what I mean? And so when I talked to Joel, he was he had a lot more information than Charles did. And that one was called Vampire Confessions. We did that one, and it was a podcast episode that got huge numbers, whatever. But Joel was very forthcoming. And one of the things that he said, there are werewolves, people that can change into werewolves, but not just wolves. There's people who choose other forms like foxes and things like that.
Yep.
They're shapeshifters. He goes, but vampires, he goes, we have a form that is given to us by the other. And I'm like, what is this other? What that other is your passenger. It's your shipmate. You become one, this symbiotic relationship with this thing.
Possession.
It's a possession. Yes, it attaches itself to the lower back, and then at the base of the neck, and it becomes a part of you. And it's this demonic attachment that's given to them by the temple, and it spies on you. It can unattach and move around your house, and they'll see it like a shadow, but it's always tethered to their spine. And it's almost impossible to get rid of. The only way to get rid of it is through Christ. And that is the only way. And I've said this to many people. I've said it on the show many times. Go ahead, Elliot. What's going on?
Well, no, I'm down. I have a hard break because I've got my Patreon meeting in about 8 minutes. So we could talk for hours on this. Kind of put a bow on it for us, Josh. I got to have you back in because,
there's a lot of information,
a lot of stuff. But put a bow on it for us.
Put a bow on it. So to put a bow on it, to wrap it up, I was told that this creature that I saw may or may not be a werewolf. It may or may not be a skinwalker, because there's multiple of these things. And some of them actually come from within the inner earth, within the earth. And so there is, according to what Joel said, there's this species that he believes from his studies that lives within the earth that looks like that all the time. But he says, in my opinion, this is what he told me, and said he's since read my book, and he said the werewolves and the Dogman phenomena, and he says I think it probably was a werewolf that you saw, and that's what he believes. So to put it, in a long-winded explanation, to put it in those terms, but yeah, there's tons and tons of information that we've talked about. We're at 600-700 episodes. Some of them go 2-3 hours on the live.
That's a lot.
Yeah, and there's a ton of.
How do we get the books, Josh? Tell us how the folks can get the books.
Just go to Amazon, Werewolves and the Dogman Phenomena, and then the Bigfoot Phenomena. They're both on Amazon. And if anybody wants to reach out to me, Josh Turner at prtpodcast.com. That's all you got to do. Just reach out to me. And, if you want to come on the show and tell an encounter, or you want to give me your story, I can retell it. I'm pretty good at retelling people's stories. At least I've been told I am. But the main thing is just get the information out there, or go to you, go to somebody who believes and somebody who's going to do it justice, because there are a lot of people out there that are frauds, they're charlatans, and they get by grifting, you know what I mean? And that's a problem, because there's a lot of people out there that they'll take one part of your story and use it, and they don't want to hear any of the rest of it. But it's all connected. And on our show, we do the whole thing: ghosts, alien abduction, Bigfoot, Dogman,
because it's all sourced from Hell's Kitchen.
It does, yeah.
Bizdar would say.
Yeah. And my vampire book should be coming out at the end of April. So that's the target.
Okay, cool. There you have it, folks. Josh Turner, thanks so much for coming on. It's been a very interesting hour, and in some ways I've gone to school too, because it just coalesces all this phenomena. Folks, here's Ashley to tell about our latest book, Rungs of Disclosure. Don't forget Josh's stuff on Amazon, and I'll see you in just a second to wrap it up.
Thanks, LA. Hey guys, I'm Ashley, and I'm excited to talk to you about L.A. Marzulli's new book, Rungs of Disclosure. What has been called his most important work to date, Rungs of Disclosure uncovers the shocking truth about UFOs and UAPs, information that has been hidden from the public since the Roswell crash of 1947. The book begins with F-18 fighter pilot Commander David Fravor, who made headlines when he appeared on Tucker Carlson and stated on the record that the UFO he encountered was not of this earth. His testimony was the catalyst for this book, the first rung on the ladder of disclosure. LA warns that we are heading toward what he calls the coming Great Deception. Everything we know, now is the time to uncover the facts. Now is the time to be prepared. Visit rungsofdisclosure.com to get your copy of L.A. Marzulli's latest book today. Arm yourself with the truth about the UFO phenomenon from a biblical perspective. To explore all of LA's other work, head over to lamarzulli.com. Back to you, LA.
Thanks so much for watching, folks. Remember, the supernatural world is real, and sometimes it manifests to people like you and me. Before I go, remember to put on the armor of God on a daily basis. And I don't have enough time really to get into that, but I put on the armor of God sometimes 2 or 3 times a day. Actually, I do have enough time. I have 5 minutes. But the helmet of salvation, right? What is the helmet of salvation? That's the first thing I put on. And I say out loud that the blood of Jesus, who is the Lamb of God who takes away the sins of the Lord, of the world, that blood is on the threshold, the doorpost, and the lintels of my mind. Jehovah Sitkanu, Jesus is my righteousness. I take that breastplate of righteousness. I am girded with the belt of truth. He is the truth, the life, and the way. My feet are shod with the gospel of peace. He is the Prince of Peace. I take that shield of faith. He is the faith. He is the author and finisher of my faith. Finally, I take a sword of the Spirit, the Word of God, alive and active, sharper than any double-edged sword. It penetrates between soul and spirit, joint and marrow. It judges the thoughts and intentions of the heart. Lord, I put on the armor. I'm yours. And I do that every day, folks, every single day. Put on the armor, walk in him. We've not been given a spirit of fear, but of love, power, and a sound mind. Thanks for watching. God bless you guys.